Hello guys, can you hear me? If yes, uh, well say yes in the chat if you can hear me. Okay, great. So uh, we are going to start our session, which is going to be dedicated to the September 9th exam. Now, what I want you guys to know is that we are going to, at least I hope to, cover the entire syllabus. Now, to cover the entire syllabus, as I said earlier, I need your support. If I have your support, then I can of course justify to myself and my team that I'm giving so much of my time to this. Now, because we are limited on time, I'm not going to repeat things that I've taught before. By that I mean, I'm not going to teach today history of Old English literature because I've taught that on a YouTube video, right? You can go to our channel. I have a complete lecture on history of Old English literature. At the same time, I have also taught Chaucer, entirety of Chaucer. There is no better lecture I'm going to give you a dare. There is no better lecture on YouTube, particularly on UGC Net English YouTube, which is better than my Chaucer lecture. Right? Give me a thumbs up in the chat or give me a like if you have seen my lecture on Chaucer and you liked it. Now, after this live, I want you to go and watch the Old English literature video and the Chaucer videos, two videos, if you have, if you want to study them. If you don't, then it is fine. Purva Rose says it's overwhelming. I can imagine, Purva Rose, but really, this is a metaphor I used for my students. I spoke to them last night. Basically, think of it like this: what you have lost because of about 40 days of not studying is just the surface. The depth of what you know is still there and has not gone anywhere. You need to restitch that surface, and that is what I'm going to do. I'm also going to show you exactly how to revise, and I will give you free resources to revise from. Let's get into it. There is a lot to go through. There is quite a lot to go through, and I don't want to spend a lot of time. If you have any doubts, let me know. Good evening, everyone. If you have any doubts, let me know in the chats. I'll come to the chats every now and then. All right, so let's get into it. We are going to start with the Renaissance. Right, as I said, Chaucer and Old English has already been done. Right. So if you look at the Renaissance, give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen. If you look at the Renaissance, there are a few key things that we need to quickly cover. There are a lot of things, but again, as I said, we are going to restitch the surface. Restitching the surface means we are going to study all the major things, and for the particular things, I'll tell you where to study them from, or if you have any other source that you have used them in the past, you will use that. Okay, if you face any issue with my voice or with the video, please let me know in the chat in that moment so I can fix it right away. We need to understand Wyatt and Sunny. Sorry. We need to understand Wyatt and Sunny, Spenser, Shakespeare, Elizabethan drama, Renaissance prose, which is very important. You can get questions from it, but people very often ignore it. The English Bible will talk about, of course, Shakespeare, metaphysical poets, Cavalier poets, Jacobean and Caroline drama, and who will tell me what is the culmination of the Renaissance. I made a video on this. The culmination of the Renaissance is Milton. Okay, so let's get into it. Now, Bosworth is an important name. Bosworth is a battle, right? Battle between Richard III and Henry Tudor. Richard III, there is a play on Richard III by Shakespeare. That play ends in a battle of Bosworth, right? Now, Henry Tudor becomes Henry VII of England. And with that starts the Tudor family. So there are certain families in Europe which rule various kingdoms. For example, the Chandragupta Maurya was a part of the Mauryan family, essentially. Similarly, Henry Tudor was a part of the Tudor family, right? Henry Tudor becomes Henry the Seventh. His son will be Henry the Eighth, a king you know all too well. Right? That is a random Taylor Swift reference. Now let's begin. Right? So the Bosworth, which is the fight where Henry the Third lost to uh, Richard the Third lost to Henry the Seventh, and Caxton's translation of Maud the Arthur happened at the same time, right? In the same year, 1485, which is considered to be the beginning of English Renaissance, right? Translation of Maud the Arthur, which is the death of Arthur by Thomas Malory. Printing of Maud the Arthur, and the defeat of the last Plantagenet king, who is the Richard the Third, the king, happens to be the beginning, the time we consider the beginning of the English Renaissance. That is 1485. A few years, about 50 years after it, in 1534, comes Act of Supremacy. Act of Supremacy, tell me what Act of Supremacy is in the chat if you know. Essentially, Act of Supremacy said that the King of England also is the head of the church. So it solidified the break away from the Roman Catholic Church. That we'll talk about all of this in detail. Right now I'm just telling you. In 1576, the first playhouse was made. First public playhouse is made. First public playhouse means that there were playhouses or similar things in the church and for the nobility. But for the first time, there was a public playhouse. And if you because this is revision, you already know what that means. Now there is, of course, the English language expands a lot. There are 12,000 new words. 12,000 new words coming to the English language means this is where modern English starts to take shape. All right. So let's now look at these things one by one. I'm going to explain some things to you outside of this material, but these notes will be provided to you for free. Okay, I will give this to you for free on our Telegram, the entire notes and notes of all the future sessions that we have. So, Western world was Christian, right? A lot of the countries in the West were Christian. When I say West, I mean Europe and the Greek and the Mediterranean era. They were Christians. Now, if they are Christians, all the Christian nations answer to one religious leader called the Pope. Pope was the head of the Roman Catholic Church, right? Roman Catholic Church. Pope is not Alexander Pope, the Pope is the head of the Roman Catholic Church. Let me quickly moisturize my hands. I have to do that every now and then. I'm sorry. Amit says very few questions appear from Renaissance to Romantic period. Amit, I know, but we have to cover this anyway. You will see a lot of the things will be covered here. Romantic, Victorian, modernism may be the most important, but as I said, I'm going to stitch the surface. We are going to look at everything, and I plan to cover the whole syllabus, right? Just because very few questions come from this topic doesn't mean we don't cover it, right? There is going to be nothing like December 2024 exam where only one exam, from only one exam all the questions came, right? We don't have one topic that we need to cover first as such. Anyway, so Roman Catholic Church is the main church of the Christians until people started breaking away from that church. They said that we have our own church. We are going to follow our own religious leaders. We don't want to follow the Pope. That thing is called Reformation. The process of breaking away from the church. All right. So let's quickly go into this. Renaissance. The things that I've talked about, let's quickly go into them. Renaissance begins with the defeat of it's not mentioned here, Richard the Third at the hands of Henry Tudor. This defeat also marks the end of War of Roses. War of Roses was between House of York and Lancaster. We'll go quickly. In the same year, William Caxton printed Thomas Malory's Le Morte d'Arthur, which is again the beginning of the English Renaissance. The press of Caxton was set up in Westminster, right? So the Tudor dynasty is going to look like this. The Tudor dynasties are this. These are the Stuarts, right? Henry the Seventh, who won at Bogsworth. Henry the Eighth, who broke away from Roman Catholic Church. Edward the Fourth, young king, didn't do much, right? Mary the First, also called Bloody Mary, she tried to bring back Catholicism, and she did not have any heir. So after her, her sister Queen Elizabeth the First took the reins. She's also called the Virgin Queen. And one thing you need to know about her, that she also wrote poetry, and she's the one who under whose reign England fought the Spanish Armada. So at this point, nationalism starts becoming prominent. Defeating of the Spanish Armada means that England, a newer nation in some ways, has defeated a proper navy power. Right? It establishes England's supremacy. Queen Elizabeth I does not have any child because she never married. So James I, one of her relatives, becomes the king. He was already the king of Scotland. But one interesting thing to note here is that even though he was the king of Scotland, he did not unite England and Scotland. Charles I is the king who is beheaded after the Civil War, and then the Commonwealth is established. Right? Now the Reformation, as I said, is the process through which a particular nation or a group of people break away from the Roman Catholic Church. Yes, Garima, it is a golden period of English literature. Now, Reformation needs to be understood as a theological thing and a political thing, which means you break away from the Roman Catholic Church for theological reasons. Means you disagree with their perspectives on God. That is what Martin Luther was doing, right? His disagreement was theological, which means he disagreed with their definition and their ways of dealing with matters relating to God. This is called a doctrinal difference. The doctrine of Christianity was different. His main issue was the sale of indulgences. So the Church of Wittenberg and Catholic Church in general, they did one interesting thing. They said, if you have committed a sin, pay us some money and you will be forgiven. So basically you could buy sinning. You could buy your way out of committing a sin. So it's called indulgence, that you are allowed to indulge in sin as long as you pay a fees. And Martin Luther did not like that. He said, God will not sell you indulgence like this. So he had a lot of issues, including this one. And those issues was posted at the door of the church. And total issues were 95. These are called the 95 Theses of Martin Luther. Right? And then he was excommunicated, which means church kicked him out in 1521. Good morning, Herman. This was a doctrinal quarrel. But in England, King Henry VIII actually wanted to get divorce from Catherine of Aragon. Right? Actually, the word is annulment. Divorce is not the word. These are our own notes, Vinayak. They are based on Literary History of English Literature. I will send these notes for free to all of you. Again, let's go very quickly, right? So, Henry VIII, the king of England at the time, wanted a male child, and he said that his wife Catherine of Aragon cannot give him that child. Now the interesting thing is, science has told us that if he did not have a male child, it's because of the man, right? Woman cannot control that. But fair, what is science here? And so he asked the Pope, the head of the Catholic Church, who was Clement the Seventh. He said, nah brother, you cannot marry to another woman, you are just kind of a creep right now. And he said, you know what, I'm going to break away from the church. And he, after a lot of struggle, established the Act of Supremacy. Act of Supremacy made him the head of the church in England. Earlier head of the church was the Pope Clement the Seventh, or whoever the Pope was before him and after him. But he said, no more Roman Catholicism, I'm going to have my own church. That is the Act of Supremacy of 1534. Right? And suddenly monasteries were dissolved. Now, dissolution of monasteries were these church-owned land where priests lived, and they also had some land in control of them. Basically, they were like feudals but religious. Now, these monasteries had a lot of money because they controlled a lot of land, they controlled a lot of things, and of course, they were the representatives of gods on earth. So monasteries had a lot of money. When monasteries, which are Catholic, were dissolved, all that money went to the nobility, right? All that money went to the nobility, to the crown and the gentry. Gentry is the nobility. Since the rich people were very, very rich suddenly, they could now fund writers. They could now buy books, they could fund writers, and they could build playhouses. They could go to playhouses. Extra money made it possible for literature to flourish. So Reformation is part of the reason why literature could exist in a golden age after Henry VIII. Give me a thumbs up if you understand that. Henry Tudor did not make Anglican Church. He was a Henry Tudor. Usually, when we say Henry Tudor, Annapura, when we say Henry Tudor, we mean Henry VII, right? Because he was the first Tudor king. Thomas More revolted against the act of, yes, Thomas More did revolt against, and he was punished. Now, again, note, he broke away from the Roman Catholic Church because he wanted to annul his marriage. So it's not a doctrinal difference. He did not break away because he disagreed with the Roman Catholic Church. He broke away because of politics, right? It was a political difference. It was opportunistic. It was an opportunity for him to get a divorce and marry somebody else. The nationalist movement was also strong in the age of Chaucer. In Elizabeth, which movement is stronger between these two periods? You could say that in the age of Elizabethan, in the Elizabethan age, Ajay, it was for the first time in a few hundred years that England properly had stability. They did not have a lot of threat from their French relatives, and they had a queen who defeated a major power not by fighting but because there was a tempest. There was a storm that helped them. So they believed that God was on their side. So I believe nationalist movement was stronger in the Elizabethan time. Now there was another type of Protestantism, that was John Calvin's, right? Geneva is a place. He shaped Scottish Presbyterianism, right? We'll talk about that later, but they will be important in a minute because it is Calvin's brand of Protestantism which becomes Puritanism that John Bunyan and Milton will follow, right? So let's look at some dates again. 1485, Battle of Bosworth and Caxton's Malady, right? 1517, Luther's 95 Thesis. 1534, Act of Supremacy. England's break with Rome means Roman Catholic Church. 1588 is the Spanish Armada. 1605 is something called the Gunpowder Plot. Gunpowder Plot was basically a plot to assassinate James the First. That in 1611, authorized version of the Bible came out, right? King James Bible. That's the authorized edition of the Bible. We'll look at all of this in detail, right? Now let's talk about humanism and the new learning. I'm going to go through this a little quickly. So basically, in the medieval times, everyone who studied anything, they studied religion. They did not study literature seriously. They did not study rhetoric seriously. They did not study grammar seriously. But suddenly, because of the fall of Constantinople, and there were churches which had all the Greek works, the churches which had the Greek works after the fall of the city that protected them could not save those Greek works, and those Greek works came out. They started being circulated, and a new learning was rediscovered. This is the learning of the Greeks and the Romans. I have a whole lecture on this too. Now, humanism in the beginning was a scholarly program. It was a scholarly program, which means it was a syllabus. So the syllabus that you have of UGC Net English is what humanism was in the beginning. After that, it becomes much more. In humanism syllabus, they studied Greek and Latin texts instead of the Bible. Yes, I will cover criticism as well in a separate lecture. We'll talk about some basic things, mimology, but not in a lot of detail right now. We'll cover criticism in detail later, right? So they started reading these things as literature and history, right? What did I say? In medieval times, all they studied was religion, but suddenly they were reading things which were just literature and history. So I'm not interested in what God has said right now. I'm interested in what Sophocles has said. I'm interested in what Aristotle has said. That was a new way of thinking. That way of thinking gives rise to putting the human at the center of inquiry. Why? Because Aristotle, Socrates, and uh, yes, they are beneficial for December as well. Winkle, Win. So, sorry. Aristotle, Socrates, Sophocles, Homer, in all of these works, they are central heroes who are sometimes flawed. They are philosophies which are about the human nature. Unlike the Bible, which is about the word of God, these were works that individual could read for themselves. Right? So that reading for yourself already makes the human important. Now, one very important figure is Erasmus. Erasmus is the person who brought this new syllabus to England. Particularly, he taught at Cambridge University and he edited the Greek New Testament in 1516. Greek New Testament means Greek Bible. Right? And he wrote a text called Praise of Folly, which is something you need to know. Again, not going deep into this. And he was a friend of a guy called Thomas More, and you all know who Thomas More is. Right? Thomas More was a chancellor, which means he was a person with political power. He was the first English writer to invent a whole society, which is utopia. Right? He was the first person to write speculative fiction in some ways. Right? And in his utopia, he talks about a world which is ideal, published in 1516 in Latin and English 1551. And in this ideal world, he described everything from day to religion and everything. So it was an interesting way to look at what the world could be. That's what utopia does. Utopia is not supposed to be something you read for fun, but it is something that you need to read to understand what else could be different in the world. Right? Now, we are not sure how much of the views in Utopia are Thomas More's, because there's a frame narration. Remember that Utopia is a frame narration, right? It's not a directly narrated text. Now, as one of you mentioned, he never accepted Henry VIII as the head of church, which means he declined to accept the Act of Supremacy and was beheaded in 1535. Now, his book called History of King Richard III. Now, remember, Richard III is the king whom Henry VII, Henry VII was father of Henry VIII, defeated at Bogsworth. Right? He wrote History of Richard III, which became the source for Shakespeare. Right? His other works are a dialogue of comfort against tribulation. Right? We have talked about utopia. We have talked about this. Now, humanism as it arrives in England, it has a Platonic accent, which means it is a Plato, it is based on Plato's philosophy. Right? Platonic accent also gives us Neoplatonism. Neoplatonism is a very important medieval and early Renaissance philosophy, which basically says that earthly beauty is a part, that is the thing that leads to divine. So if you study beauty, you can reach divinity. That if you study beauty, you can reach divinity. That is Neoplatonism. It was a very important thing for them. Now, this is why in Renaissance you have sonnets which are about love. So if I'm talking about my beloved's beautiful eyes, why am I allowed to publish something like this in a world? Yes, Plotinus is a philosopher who helped establish Neoplatonism. If I'm describing my beloved's beautiful eye, why should someone care about it? Essentially, they should care about it because it is through earthly beauty that you reach the divine beauty. It is through earthly beauty that you reach the higher divine truth. That is why you will see this idea come up often in Renaissance poetry. There's some in early humanism we had some other works. Balsare Castiglione's Il Cortegiano, which is the courtier, which was written in 1528, and Thomas Hobby translated it in 1561. Now give me a thumbs up in the chat if you are confused how to remember all of these dates. Give me a thumbs up if you are confused how to remember all of these dates. Around this time, Sir Thomas Eliot, now remember these are prose works. Prose works are also important. Thomas Eliot published something called The Book Named the Governor, 1531. In book named The Governor, he and in the Courtier, these books talk about how a governing class should behave, right? How a governing class should behave. Now, the intention was to teach how governing classes should behave, and actually, what happened was they created the English prose, which was not religious. Now, how to memorize? You are going to use free flashcards that I'm going to give you to memorize. Let me tell you where those flashcards will be, right? First, you go to our website. This is how you're going to access all the free revision material that you're going to get access to. You go to our website, give me a thumbs up if you can see the website. You go to our website, click on pricing, this button right here, pricing. Go to the ultimate revision course. Right? No need to buy anything. Just click on enroll now. You don't have to buy anything. Click on enroll now. Once you click on enroll now, you will see all of this. Now the free material is right here. Right? In free material, you can find our Routledge History of English Literature quiz, which is entirely there. Right? You can, for example, up to Shakespeare, you can revise all of these. These are available for free. And there is a module called December 9 Special Revision. In this, I will add more and more free material as we cover our live sessions. Again, for live sessions to work, I'm going to need you guys to support and watch the lives. Right now, everything I will teach you, these are 2 quizzes based on that. These quizzes are not supposed to test your knowledge. These quizzes are supposed to help you go through this material again. And if you don't score well, wait for one day and try again, and you will see that you remember more now. Options will be shuffled every time, so it won't be like that. Today or early tomorrow, I will add the flashcards of all the major dates that we have talked about here. Okay, and those flashcards will help you remember everything. Right, give me a thumbs up if you think that's going to help you. Now, at the same time, in this around this time period, the universe was changing because people like Copernicus said that Earth is not at the center, right? Which made the world a little bit more complicated. We are going to skip this for now. Right? Now, around this time in the early Renaissance, which is going to be end of 1400s, is what we are going to call early Renaissance. Around this time, one more thing was happening. A few more things were happening. And all of those things combined give us the entirety of the Renaissance architecture. First is print. Printing is possible. In medieval times, there was someone called scribe. A scribe's job is to basically make copies of books by hand. Now, if you make copies of books by hand, how many books can you create, right? Very few, and it's a very expensive process. Once you have printing, you can create many books. So printing press at Westminster, by whom? By William Caxton in 1476 creates the market for the books. Because I have published so many books, now you can buy books. Now at this point, authors do not own the copyright. Right? So authors cannot make a lot of money from their books, but people who publish and sell them do. Right? Now at the same time, there was also an environment of patronage, which means a rich person will pay you money to write things. Rich person will pay you money to write things. That is called having patronage, right? So patronage was like a job. Spencer, Sidney, Shakespeare, and all the major writers, in fact, almost every writer who was writing for the public at the time had patronage. And I also told you, because monasteries had lost their money, that is why patronage was made possible to begin with. Now there were playhouses, which means these were public theaters which opened in 1576, where a writer could be paid by the crowd. So people who want to watch the writer's play could pay the writer instead of them needing a patron, right? So suddenly you could become very, very rich just by writing, right? Now the most important economic fact of English history remains to be the playhouse. Why? Because the works which were created in the playhouse are going to be very, very important, right? So in the romances, we have some rudimentary form of the novel, for example. The vernacular Bible came into being as well. We'll talk about everything in detail in a second. So there are multiple translations of the Bible. Most of them were illegal. Some of them were legal. We'll talk about the legal ones in a second. And eventually in 1611, King James authorized a proper vernacular Bible. Vernacular Bible means Bible in English, which is called the King James Bible. Of course, there was someone called Master of Rebels. There was censorship back then. Master of Rebels job was basically to make sure that everything that is published is okay to be put on stage. There is nothing politically sensitive. There is nothing dangerous. Right? This we are not going to talk about. Now let's talk about some important works. There is Wyatt and Sydney. We can talk about this, but at the same time, let me show you something. If you go here, sorry, this is the recorded lectures module where you will get your free material. Excuse me. I think something is happening. Let's just continue. Basically, there's a proper lecture on Wyatt and Surrey too, where you'll be able to learn a lot more things. So there was an Italian poet, a poet of the Italian Renaissance called Francesco Petrarch. Petrarch wrote sonnets to a person called Laura. You need to know this. Who is the subject of the sonnet? For Petrarchan sonnet, it is Laura. Right? Now, his poetry was in Italian, and that was something that English writers imported from Italy. Right? He's a member of the Italian Renaissance. He learned printing for Germany. Yes, he learned printing for Germany and opened his own press. Correct. Now the English poets took the 14-line rhyme stanza from them and they started writing their own sonnets. Now you need to know that right now there was no market for the sonnet, right? So they were writing sonnet essentially for their friends. They were circulating them amongst their own circles, right? Sonnet also had a psychological basis. Why psychological basis important? Because the works, because the works which were published in the Middle Ages, they were not very psychological. There was human nature there, but a lyric poetry about a particular person's emotion. I'm going to give you a challenge. Can you write down the name of one lyric poetry about a particular person's emotion which was major, or which was published in the Middle Ages, right? Now, two people who mastered this, when I say mastered, the mastering the earlier part. Neither Wyatt nor Surrey were great poets. The only reason we study them is because they are first. They are the first major poets. They are not great poets. They were writing sonnets, and long after they had written their sonnets, in 1577, a book came out by Richard Tottel called Tottel's Miscellany, also called Songs and Sonnets, in which their poem was published. A lot of these poems were published anonymously, right? Now, at this point, Wyatt was already dead. Remember that. This text comes much later. But because this is a book that came out, people suddenly had a book which was about lyric poetry, and other writers could think about writing lyric poetry. Writers like Hockley were never that prominent. Like Tottel's Miscellany was published, medieval writers could never get that much prominence. Now let's talk about Thomas Wyatt. Was also a political diplomat in Henry VIII's dangerous court. Why dangerous? Because people were being persecuted for being Catholics. He adapts and translates Petrarch's works, right? But his own work is abrupt. His poetry is not very beautiful. He has written a beautiful poem called They Flee From Me, Who Sometime Did Me Seek. He also wrote Whoso Lists to Hunt, Mine Own John Points, and Psalm paraphrases, right? He paraphrased Psalms. Mine Own John Points is a verse satire. Remember that. But his most important poem is They Flee From Me, That Sometime Did Me Seek. In my lectures, I have covered the whole poem. I even read the whole poem for my students. Right, moving on, then there is Henry Howard, aka Surrey, one of the two people who bring sonnet, and he has two innovations. Now, who will tell me what the two innovations are before I show it to you? Who will tell me what the two innovations are? I'm sorry, I'm not waiting a lot of time for your answers because we have a lot to cover. The two innovations are the English sonnet, which is called the Shakespearean sonnet. Shakespearean sonnet is the one which has three quatrains: A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, G, G, ending with a couplet. Now, this has three quatrains, yani three stanzas of 4 lines and one couplet, right, with alternating rhymes. Now, if I change this is a quiz for you guys. If I change this, if I make it A, B, A, B, and instead of starting with C, I start with this rhyme, right? B, C, B, C, and then start with this rhyme, C, D, C, D. What is that, right? And E, E. What is this thing? What does this do? Yes, this is called the Spenserian stanza. You need to remember that because this rhyme repeats, this is called an interlocked stanza. Interlocking, like you interlock things, the stanza is interlocked by the rhyme, right? I hope that is clear. Let's move on. That was the first innovation. The Shakespearean sonnet or the English sonnet was the first innovation of Henry Howard. The second innovation is blank verse. He introduced blank verse when he translated Virgil's epic poem, the Aeneid. Remember, Virgil is a Roman writer, right? He was executed in 1547. His books, only books that we have, well, he has written more. Only books that we care about are his sonnets in Total's Miscellany and his translations of the Aeneid. He translated book 2nd and book 4th. Now, what is important about blank verse? Rhyming, blank verse is iambic pentameter, which does not rhyme, right? So, if something is written in iambic rhythm, which means da-dum, 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 and does not rhyme, that is called a blank verse, right? It is good for song, but if you want to have a speech where you are talking about, if everything you say rhymes, it will sound like a very sing-song thing. It will sound like you're not serious or something. That's why he invented blank verse without rhyme. The Aeneid is a serious poem, right, which he was translating. If every other line rhymed in the Aeneid, it would sound a little silly in English. He wanted something more serious, something which is more speech-like. Now the pentameter is da-dum. Note your heartbeat is like dhak-dhak, right? In English we write lub-dub, dhak-dhak, 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 dhak-dhak. That is considered to be also the rhythm of the iambic pentameter. Lub-dub, lub-dub, right? Da-dum, da-dum, da-dum. Now that is why it is considered to have a pulse, iambic pulse. Now this innovation of the iambic pentameter helps the English tragedy a lot, beginning with Gorbuduc, Marlowe's works, and Shakespeare. Another writer of this time, these are the very early English Renaissance writers, is John Skelton. John Skelton was writing in a medieval tradition, and his way of writing poetry is called Skeltonics. Right? There are very small lines which are very often satirical, enjoyably rude. Right? He's not a very serious writer, and his lines are short and heavily rhymed. You need to remember that. Right? In my lecture again, I can't show it to you right now, but in Ultimate Revision course, there's a lecture where I have shown you what Skeltonics looks like. So in case you get a line identification question, that will help you. Now, Philip Sidney was also the complete, moving on, before we move on for John Skelton, I want to talk about something else. So in the Old English, we have Beowulf. In the Middle English, we have Chaucer. Then after Chaucer, there are no major writers. So I'm including John Skelton, I'm including White, I'm including Surrey, and I'm including all the other writers of this age that you may know of. The first, including Sidney, the first great writer after Chaucer is Spenser. Between this, there are no great writers. Sidney is close though. That Sidney was a Renaissance man. Now, what is a Renaissance man? Renaissance man essentially is an all-rounder. Someone who is both intellectual, brave, who can travel, who can be political, who can be honest, who can be emotional, who can be rational, a person who can do all sorts of things. So Sidney was a courtier, he was political, he was a soldier, he was brave, he was a critic, he was rational, he was a poet, he was emotional, he was a novelist. We say novelist because of Arcadia. He died in Netherlands fighting the Spanish. Again, no need to remember that. Three works that we care about are Astrophil and Stella, Arcadia, and a defense of poesy. Yes, universal man memology. Astrophil and Stella is his sonnet sequence. Astrophil means star lover and Stella means star. Right? So it's kind of cute, isn't it? Give me a thumbs up if it is cute. Like he called his beloved Stella, star, and himself star lover. Yes, Shatabdi, it was Penelope Devereux who was his beloved subject. Now, it has 108 sonnets and 11 songs. Now tell me quickly, how are you going to remember this information? I have told you already how to remember this information. Tell me in chats how you are going to remember this information. So for those who have just joined. In Astrophil and Stella, there is an important line where he says, his muse tells him, look into thy heart and look into your heart and write. In which he says, yes, flashcards. I'm going to give you free flashcards in the ultimate revision course. You can find it in the description here. Right? Free flashcards will be given either tonight or tomorrow morning. You already have revision quizzes. So the sonnet which starts the collection Astrophil and Stella basically says that I wanted to write a poem to attract the attention of Stella. Right? He thought that if I write something sad, she'll feel bad for me, and her pity I will win. And he was not able to write anything. He tried to copy other people. He said, when I was copying other people, I was not able to. He says, others' feet felt strangers in my way. Others' feet here means metrical feet. It means others' poetry felt strange. So he could not write anything. His pen was very annoyed, right? His pen was like a bad student. It was not working. So his muse said, look into your heart and write. And that is the most important line in all of Astrophil and Stella. Look into your heart and write. Right? He also has another poem with how sad steps, O moon, thou climbs the sky, which was referred to or alluded to by Philip Larkin. Anyway, he also wrote Arcadia. Arcadia is a prose romance which is like a novel. Right? It is one of the predecessors of the novel. Romance is a predecessor of the novel. It has some verse interludes as well. Now there are two editions, Old Arcadia and New Arcadia. Old Arcadia was composed in 1580 and is unfinished, and a better Arcadia was published in 1590. If you want to understand Arcadia in detail, I have covered the whole summary. I have shown you how both the editions differ in my Philip Sidney lecture, which you can find again in the complete revision course where you have free material as well. Then he, of course, as you all know, wrote Defense of Poetry or an Apology for Poetry. It is the first substantial work of English literary criticism. Now, what you need to know here is that Defense of Poesy is a work which is synthetic. Synthetic means it does not have original ideas. It has synthesis of Renaissance ideas and antiquity ideas. So Philip Sidney is not writing anything new. Philip Sidney is rehashing the ideas of Horace, of Aristotle, and is responding not only to his contemporaries, but like Horace and Aristotle, he is responding to Plato. Now his main issue was that people do not read poetry because poetry is useless. He said poetry is not useless, and there's a famous line that a poet nothing affirms and therefore never lieth. Because poetry does not consider itself to be a truth teller anyway, you cannot say that poetry is lying. He also says that nature's world is brazen and poetry only presents golden. If you want to cover Philip Sidney's A Defense of Poesy in complete detail with every important sentence, there is a video on our channel where I have a whole lecture where I read through major portions and tell you everything. Right? He talks about all sorts of things, different types of poems. He talks about how the ancient, the biblical, and the current poems, how do they differ. So for all of those things, watch that lecture. It's under 1 hour and you will never need to study anything else from Sidney again. And yes, it was written as a response to Stephen Gosson, right? To Stephen Gosson. Now, one thing you need to know is that this is not confirmed. We believe this is the case. Why? Because Gosson refers to Sydney. We don't need to have to believe that it was written in response to Gosson. We believe it, it's a convention, but we don't have hard and fast abuse. Yes, Shatabdi, in his book called School of Abuse, Gosson dedicated that book to Philip Sidney. That is the reason why we say that Gosson is the main person who's being attacked in defense of poesy, right? But in the text itself and in the things that Sidney has written, there is no evidence. Now let's look at some minor writers of early Renaissance. There is Walter Raleigh. He is most well known as an explorer. Without Walter Raleigh and people like him, there would be no Indian colonialism and no American colonialism. These are the people who established England as a maritime economy and a maritime force. He was a historian and wrote a very important book called The History of the World. You can read this book even now on, you can find it on internet for free. It's a very wrong book. It doesn't understand history very well because he was not a historian as such. He was not an academic historian. And this was written from the prison, right? But the more importantly, he also wrote a reply to Marlowe's Passionate Shepherd to His Love. Christopher Marlowe has written a poem called Passionate Shepherd to His Love, and Walter Raleigh wrote his response to that. We have read that entire poem, both Marlowe's Passionate Shepherd and Walter Raleigh, in our Renaissance lectures, which you can also find in the complete revision course. After Walter Raleigh, another minor writer is Samuel Daniel, who wrote sonnets to Delia. Right? Delia is the subject of his poetry. Right? He also wrote a defense of rhyme. Right? His criticism we do not read, but you need to know that Samuel Daniel wrote a critical work called Defense of Rhyme, and he's also written a sonnet sequence called Delia. Sonnet sequence are the most prominent Elizabethan literary forms after the tragedy, after the Elizabethan tragedy. Then there is Michael Drayton, very important, who wrote sonnets, right? Collection is called Idea, and Polyolbion, which is a topographical poem. You need to know this. A topographical poem is a poem which describes or is about a landscape. Topographical poem, one of the earliest topographical poem is precisely this, Polyolbion, right? Albion is the mythical or legendary name of England. Polyolbion is a topographical poem. Can you name another topographical poem? One very famous topographical poem, right? I'll wait for your answer. Now, Thomas Champion also was a poet and composer, right? The poetry he wrote was put to music, not an important writer. Fir Greville was an important poet. He was a friend of Sidney, and he is one of the reasons why we know Tintern Abbey. Exactly, Vishal. Tintern Abbey is a topographical poem, and you even had a question like that in December. Fir Greville is a Cambridge scholar. And because of his diary entries and his journals, we know that Hamlet was performed at the university. Right? He is a literary historian, like not actually, but because he was a man of letters, because he cared about literature, in his works we see a lot of the literature of his time. He was also the biographer of Sidney. Right? Again, we don't read him more as a poet, we read him more as a record keeper of the history of that times literature. Now there are some female authors. Now this is very important. Routledge History of English Literature is the only history of English literature which also includes female authors, right? Because it is a work that looks at their contributions as well. So David Daches and William J. Long, Edward Albert, all of they are limited. Routledge is the best, and then Michael Alexander. Mary Sidney Herbert, or Countess of Pembroke, was Sidney's sister. Right? She is the person because of whom Arcadia exists. Right? She completed and compiled the Psalm translations of Sidney. And he made the Wilton, Wilton is a place, right? Wilton, a center of patronage, right? She was a great patron of arts. She is the Countess of Pembroke. She's the important politically and rich person. Amelia Lanier is the first English woman to publish an original volume of poetry. Amelia Lanier, remember, the first English woman. She wrote a text called Salve Dure Judarium, right? Which is a country house poem. Again, not important. What you need to know is that her name is Amelia Lanier and she is the first woman to write an English poem. Now let's talk about Spenser. Edmund Spenser is the first great English poet after Chaucer. Right? After Spenser, we have of course Shakespeare, but this is the first ambitious writer after Chaucer. His works we'll look at are Shepherd's Calendar, Faerie Queene, right, which are the most important. Of course, his sonnets, Amority, are also very important. Now, Edmund Spenser was the period's great professional idealist. Here, idealism means that he was someone who was very interested in ideas, dealing with abstract concepts, right? It doesn't mean that he was all about everything should be perfect, right? And he established what a major poet's career should look like. So they should write a pastoral, then an epic on the Virgilian mode, right? So first a pastoral, which is going to be the Shepherd's Calendar, and then an epic. That is going to be the way in which a lot of poets will try to write. Of course, who will perfect it? Who will perfect this method of writing the pastoral first and an epic second? Tell me quickly, who will perfect it? His models were Chaucer. So he copied Chaucer's English a lot because he wanted his poetry to sound serious. He did a lot of weird things to make his poetry sound serious. We'll talk about them. But he copied Chaucer's way of writing, right? And he he was inspired by Chaucer's way of writing. Yes, Milton is the answer. The pastoral that Milton wrote is Lycidas, and the epic that of course he wrote is Paradise Lost. He took Chaucer's language, Thomas Mallory's chivalric material are the Arthurian legends. In my Spenser lecture, I have talked about Arthurian legends in enormous detail. And he took Homer, Virgil, and Ariosto, all three epic poets, for scale. So he was going to write a chivalric epic in archaic verse. But let's first talk about the Shepherd's Calendar, which came out in 1579. Shepherd's Calendar has 12 eclogues. Eclogue is a type of verse inspired by Virgil. 12, one for each month, right? For each month there is one poem, right? And in this he uses the character of Colin Clout, right? It was introduced by Skelton. Now the eclogues have commentary by someone called E.K. Right? So when it was published with commentary. Now I said he did a lot of weird things to make his work seem important. Right? Now one of those weird things is adding commentary. We believe that E.K. is nobody but Spenser himself. He added commentary to his own work. So people think it is important. Right? All of this we have talked about. It is deliberately archaic, which means it uses old language. So when you are identifying a poem, if it has old language, it could be Spenser. And it was about, as a pastoral, it is going to be about the rural life, right? About the life of countryside, about the life of shepherds. And it is dedicated to Sydney. Now, Faerie Queene is the important one, 1590 to 1596. Faerie Queene is an allegory. An allegory is a story in which you tell a story about another story. So every character in your story represents something else. So as you learn this story, you also learn a higher story, right? He had planned 12 books, but could finish only 6, right? He's following a knight in each book, and that knight represents one moral virtue. In in book 1, it is the Red Cross Knight who represents holiness. In book 2, it's Sir Guyon who represents temperance. In book 3 is Britomartis or Britomart, who represents chastity. She also represents Queen Elizabeth. In book 4, it's Campbell and Tramont, who represent friendship. In book 5, it's Sir Artegall, who represents justice, and in book 6 there is Sir Calidore, who represents courtesy. Can you tell me which knight represents all the virtues? Which knight represents all the virtues? Tell me quickly. Now, these virtues are said to be inspired by Aristotle, but the overlap is not quite exact. Now, the first 3 books came out in 1590, right? This and the next 3 books came out in 1596. There's also something called mutability stanzas, which we'll talk about in a second. Now, the queen for whom all of these knights work is Gloriana, who is the fairy queen, and she represents Elizabeth. Fairy queen is also represented by Belphoebe and Britomart, right? Different parts of different things. Yes, King Arthur is the ideal knight who has all the virtues, but at this point he's not a king, he's a knight. Duessa is an enchantress. Duessa is an enchantress who represents Mary of Scots, of course, but it's more importantly Catholicism. Now, there are unfinished mutability cantos. Mutability cantos are about a god called Mutability, a goddess called Mutability, who represents change, right? And that book talks about how change is more important than permanence, right? Now, let's talk about the Spenserian stanza. Again, in my own lectures, which you can find in the Ultimate Revision course, where you have free material as well. In there, I've talked about mutability cantos, each and every canto and everything in a lot more detail. Right now, we have to go quicker. Spenserian stanza has 9 lines, 8 of which are iambic pentameter, which is lub dub lub dub lub dub, and 1 is an iambic hexameter, which is called Alexandrine, right? So 8 iambic pentameter lines plus 1 iambic hexameter line. The hexameter is called an Alexandrine, based on a poet, right? Alexander. The rhyming scheme of the Spenserian stanza is A B A B B C B C C. This C is the Alexandrine or the iambic hexameter, and it finishes the whole thing. In my lectures, I have also shown you an example of how this last line works. Now, the final line acts as a break, and the poets who borrow this are Burns, Byron, Keats, and Shelley, right? These are the important poets that you need to know. Now, some shorter poems of Spenser that we need to know are Amority, which is 89 sonnets, very important, and the subject of the sonnet is Elizabeth Boyle, very important, right, whom he married. Epithalamion, which is a wedding song, which of course is about his marriage to Elizabeth Boyle, and it's a wedding hymn, which is a poem that follows numerology very well. So that 24 stanzas for each hour of the day, right? And there are about 365 lines for each day of the year, right? And the refrain is changing, right? The woods to me shall answers and my echo ring, right? Woods to me shall hear and my something something. This refrain keeps repeating every stanza. Now, can someone tell me what is special about Amority as a sonnet sequence? What is special about Amority as a sonnet sequence? And meanwhile, I'll tell you one important poem. There's one important sonnet, which is one day I wrote her name upon the strand, but came the waves and washed it away. Next day I wrote it in a second hand, that came the waves and made my something its prey. So he was writing her name and waves are taking away, right? So this sonnet is very important. What is special about Amority? You tell me as I go ahead. Complaints is a collection. It has multiple tales, which more importantly has Mother Hubbard's tale, right? Which is a beast fable, which has a lot of political intrigue in it, and it has allegorical references to the people of the court. I've talked about it in detail in my Spenser lecture. Calling Clouds Come Home Again is a pastoral autobiography of the poet, where he talks about London and Ireland, his life in London and Ireland. Right now, it's important to note that even though Spenser wrote very pretty, beautiful poetry, he was actively murdering the Irish people, which we see in his text called A View of the Present State of Ireland, where he's very, very strict against the Irish people, and Irish people were colonized by England the way us Indians were colonized. For hymns, not important. Prothalamion is important. It's a spousal verse written on a engagement basically, and there is a important poem, important line here, which you need to know. Sweet Thames, which is a river in London, sweet Thames, run softly till I end my song. Now, what makes Amority special is that it has a happy ending. Almost all the sonnets end with a kind of spiritual resolution. For example, Dante's sonnets, exactly, very good Shatabdi. Dante's sonnets are about a dead woman, right? About Beatrice. Petrarch's Laura is someone he never gets as such. But Sidney, on the other hand, wrote about his own wife, right? Someone who he would marry. This prose work is also important, right? I just talked about it. Now moving on to drama. What was drama like before Shakespeare? Now there are two classical models, which means two ancient types of drama that people are going to learn from. First is Seneca, who supplied the model for tragedy. Then there are Plautus and Terence, who supplied the model for comedy. Right, Senecan tragedy has 5 acts. It has a chorus. It has a stoical rhetoric, so it's not very passionate. It has ghost, revenge, and a great deal of blood. Right, most prominently, it is going to be the revenge tragedy. But all of English tragedy of this time owes its structure to Seneca. Seneca happens to be one of the writers who was taught in grammar schools. So Shakespeare must have read some of Seneca. Now Plautus and Terence are also writers. Remember, both of these are Roman writers. And from their works, we get the comedy with intrigue plots, which means there's some mystery, someone being fooled, mistaken identities, twins, boastful soldiers. These are all stock characters. Yes, Pot of Gold is by Plautus. Stock character is a particular type of character who does something. Right? He will keep doing that. Like a boastful soldier is going to be a bad character who keeps boasting. Cunning servants, young lovers, outwitting old fathers. All of these are things that recur. In my Shakespeare lecture, again in the Ultimate Revision course where you have free material as well, I have talked about these particular things in a lot of detail, what each character represents and what the examples are. Now there were interludes as well. Interludes are basically fun secular plays. We are going to talk about two. Henry Medwall, who wrote Fulgence and Lucrece. Fulgence and Lucrece is 1497, so we are just entering the 16th century. It's the earliest surviving purely secular English play, right? You can see two suitors, one virtuous and poor, and one noble and worthless. So there are two men who want a woman. One is rich but a bad person, other is poor but a good person. Then there is John Haywood, who wrote The Play of the Weather and the 4 Ps. 4 Ps are Palmer, Pardoner, Apothecary and Peddler, right? All of this is very basic. Now let's talk about some of the firsts, right? Ralph Royster Doyster by Nicholas Udall is the first English comedy, right? Where a plotting braggart. What is a plotting braggart? Someone tell me what a plotting braggart is. It's trying to win over a widow, right, and is defeated. In my lectures, I have looked at some important lines from this play as well. 1552. In 1561, we have Gorboduc. In Gorboduc by Norton and Sackville, we have the first English tragedy. A British king divides his kingdom between two sons and a tragedy ensues. It introduces the blank verse to the English stage. Blank verse itself was introduced by Henry Howard. We have looked at some lines from Gorboduc in our lectures as well. 1566 is Gammer Gurton's Needle, which is about a woman who has lost her needle. It's a comedy. 1592, where we have a proper English tragedy called the Spanish tragedy by Thomas Kyd, which is the first or the earliest proper revenge tragedy. Right? Hieronymo is mad again is an important line in this play. Now, who will tell me? I asked you something. What did I ask you guys? Yeah, what is a Plotine braggart? Who will tell me what a Plotine braggart is? I guess you can't see this. Wait. Yeah, who will tell me what a Plotine braggart is? Plotine means inspired by Plautus. A braggart is going to be this. A braggart is going to be this archetype, right? So it's a Plautus inspired character and a play. Now let's talk about university bits. So there are a lot of people who are very well studied, and they went to the university, but they could not find jobs. Now, since they could not find jobs, they started writing for the stage. Now, at this point, one thing that you need to know is that there were no places as such where an actor could work. So there would be a central educated person who would write a play, and he would have a company of actors who are all lower class people, people who are from the poor sections of the society. So there were actors and there were writers. Writers were higher class, educated but not very rich, and there were actors, uneducated and poor people. People who belonged to the group called university wits are Christopher Marlowe, Robert Greene, George Peele, Thomas Nash, and Thomas Lodge. Sometimes Thomas Kyd is included as well. They brought classical learning into the playhouse. Now, one thing you need to know here, which is very central, is that before this, if Christopher Marlowe is a young child and he goes to study himself, and he goes to a play himself, that I'm Christopher Marlowe, maybe I'm Shakespeare, maybe I'm Robert Greene, and I'm going to watch a play. The play I will watch will be the miracle and the morality plays. These are Christian plays, allegorical plays where sins are allegorically personified as characters, where good people, bad people are personified as characters. This PDF will be shared in the Telegram. And these characters, and these are the plays that they grew up upon. Once they write themselves, they have studied also at the university the works of Seneca and Plautus and Terence and other Greek writers, right? Meander, Euripides, other Roman and Greek writers. Once they have studied them and they have watched miracle morality plays, the plays they will write will be a mixture of the two. The best example of that mixture is Dr. Faustus. Now let's look at some of their works. Robert Greene wrote romantic comedies. His important work is Friar Bacon and Friar Bungay. He wrote a prose romance called Pandosto, which is the source for Shakespeare's Winter's Tale. Right? Robert Greene's Pandosto, which is a prose romance, is the source of Shakespeare's Winter's Tale. He wrote pamphlets on the London underworld, not important. Goat's Worth of Wit is a work which he wrote, in which he wrote about Shakespeare, that he's an upstart crow beautified by our feathers. So he said Shakespeare is a ordinary person who is using our things that we have started to make his own money. Why? Because I said writers were high class, actors were low class. Shakespeare started as an actor. That's why he's an upstart crow. George Peele wrote The Old Wives' Tale, The Arrangement of Paris. These two works, right? Thomas Lodge wrote Rosalind, which is a prose romance from which Shakespeare was inspired to write As You Like It. As You Like It, Rosalind, and who's the guy? What is the Orlando, right? Then there is Thomas Nash, who wrote, who's a prose writer. We'll look at him in chapter 6 of this PDF. Thomas Kyd, who wrote the Spanish tragedy. Right? It's been 1 hour and we are only at page 14. I have to rush a little quickly. Christopher Marlowe was born in the same year that Shakespeare did, but he died at 29, right? At a tavern. He was accused of atheism. He was probably a government spy, and he made the blank verse into an instrument of enormous rhetorical power. When I say he made the blank verse into an instrument of enormous rhetorical power, you need to remember that implies the things that he was doing well with blank verse were rhetorical, which means that his blank verse is a blank verse of speech. His blank verse is a blank verse of declaration. His blank verse is not the blank verse of sentiment. That is what Shakespeare will do. Right? Ben Jonson called the blank verse Marlowe's mighty line. Right? His sub-characters are the same people. All of his characters are similar. His characters are a person who wants something without limit. Empire is Tamerlane. Tamerlane wants empire without limit. Dr. Faustus wanted knowledge without limit, and Geo of Malta wanted gold without limit. Right? Tamerlane the Scythian, Scythia is an empire, an ancient empire, is about Timur, Timur the king that you must have heard of, who conquers the world. Barabbas is the Geo of Malta. Right now, who opens the play of Geo of Malta? Who gives the choric or the beginning opening lines of Geo of Malta? Who will tell me who does that? Some people believe that had he been alive, he would have been as famous as Shakespeare. Yes, many people believe that. Marlowe showed the technical mastery that early Shakespeare had, but at the same time, he did not have the depth of emotion. As I said, Shakespeare gives dramatic monologue a lot more depth, a lot more emotion, which we never see as much in Marlowe. Right? For example, he talks about Dr. Faustus being moved by the beauty of Helen, and he says, was this the face that launched 1,000 ships? That is a declaration. That's a wonderfully powerful line, very beautiful line, but it's not soft, it's not personal. That is something you don't see in Christopher Marlowe a lot. His other works are Tamerlane the Great, Part 1 and 2. Yes, it's Machiavelli. The Ghost of Machiavelli gives the prologue. Dr. Faustus, Geo of Malta, Edward II. Edward II is supposed to be a homosexual king, and that's why Christopher Marlowe was also supposed to be homosexual. Hero and Leander. Hero and Leander is a tale from Ovid, and Hero and Leander are lovers. Right? We have read important parts of this poem in our lectures. You can find our Christopher Marlowe lecture in the link in description. It has free revision material as well. It's an unfinished narrative poem, and he also wrote Passionate Shepherd to his love. We have talked about all of this. Now let's talk about Elizabethan theatre a little bit more. We'll have to be a bit more quick. So there are two kind of playhouses: the public amphitheater, which is the structure of the globe, right? It is a cylindrical type building. This is the stage, this is the pit, these are the balconies, right? That's what the Elizabethan stage is like. Elizabethan theater is like. Excuse me. Now some famous ones are the beginning was with the theater in 1576. Then there was the Rose, the Swan, and in 1599 there is the most important one, the Globe, right? Right. If you had 1 penny, which is like 1 rupees, you could stand in the yard, which is called the pit. And if you had more money, you could sit in the galleries. These were the public amphitheaters. Then there were the private playhouses. Private playhouses had a roof. The amphitheaters was open, right? There was no roof. They were candlelit, and they were smaller and more expensive. The most famous one is Blackfriars. Blackfriars is a indoor private theater. Right? There will be richer people. Now, do you know, because they are candlelit, if you let a candle burn for a long time, the wick, which is the dhaga, the thread, the wick of the candle will be long and the wax will melt off. When that happens, candle starts giving you black smoke. So if you're in a playhouse and candle is giving black smoke, you are having difficulty breathing because there is no roof, because it is a roof theater, and there is smoke and make it destroying your experience. So you need to trim the wick. You go and cut the wick a little bit so the light is overpowering the smoke, right? There is not as much smoke. This is why there are act breaks. After every act there would be a break for the candle to be wicked. Right? So it is very interesting how the physical constraints of the theater made the structure of the play. Now, so what did the fact that the plays were put on in these theaters, how did that change the actual play? First, the performance was in daylight and in afternoon. right? There were no lights to dim. There was no way to create night. Therefore, if something is night, it has to be said in the sentence. If it is evening, it has to be said by the character ki, oh, this evening is so beautiful. Otherwise, people would not know that it is an evening. There is a famous line from Hamlet. The morn was mantle clad, something like this. I don't remember. If you remember, let me know. Which says that it's the sky is red. Now there was no front curtain, so there was no curtain like this, and no scenery. Right, the stage was bare, in its scarlet mantle clad. I think that's the line. So stage could not be set. The setting of the stage was done by the actors. Actor would say, look at this tree. It reminds me of Rosalind, and this grass is something like this. And if you talk like this, people will think, okay, this person is in a meadow or something. But that had to be done. Now, because there was no scenery, from scene to scene, you could move to many places too. Right? You could start in England and go to France by just saying a dialogue. You don't need to change the scenery. Right? So, character one is talking about England, and suddenly there's a different character in a different scene who just says, these French people are so idiotic, which they really are. The stage thrust out into the crowd as I drew a picture. Right, if this is the stage and this is where the people are. So stage was a part of the crowd. So the soliloquies, which is when a character is talking to themselves, was actually a character taking other people in confidence. It created interesting things. With someone like Hamlet, who's a philosopher, when he talks out loud, it makes them a part of the discussion. Audience a part of the discussion, right? Okay, this person's existential thoughts are being discussed with me right now. But if you have a character like Iago or Richard III, the last Plantagenet king, right? We talked about Bolesmith. Richard III and Iago are evil characters. So in their soliloquy, they don't talk about their emotions as much as they talk about their planning and plotting. So if they're talking about their planning and plotting, then you become co-conspirators. Right? You know what I'm going to देखना अभी मैं इसके साथ क्या करता हूँ. You become co-conspirators. Right? These are interesting things. It is like breaking the fourth wall, except they don't break the fourth wall. A character doesn't address the audience. There is a play in which that happens. We'll talk about that in a second. Women were played by boys. Right now, women were not allowed to come on stage, so all the women were played by boys. Right? So all the heroines were actually a young guy in disguise. So whenever a heroine is disguised as a man, for example, Viola, for example, Rosalind, it is also kind of funny. Right? Props and costumes were a lot. Right? There were a lot of money, so there were good costumes. Now the companies, which are the group of people who owned the theater, a group of actors, the writers, they were proper businesses. Right? An acting company was a sharing partnership. Everyone had a share of the profit. This made people like Shakespeare very, very famous. But they needed protection from the law, and for that protection, you needed a noble man to support you. So every company had to have a noble person to support them. Shakespeare was supported by the Lord Chamberlain. Lord Chamberlain is a political position of a person who basically does PR for the king. Lord Chamberlain organizes and decides all the public facing events. So job of Lord Chamberlain is basically PR. Right? After the ascension of King James the First in 1603, when after Queen Elizabeth, during Queen Elizabeth, the Lord Chamberlain's men was the group with which Shakespeare worked. After King James became the king, they start calling themselves the King's Men. Now, one more thing you need to note is that sometime in the middle of his career, the comedy of Shakespeare changes. Earlier it was silly comedy, then it becomes musical comedy. That happened because the person who was playing the most important comic character, the clown called Will Kemp, was a physical comedian. So when Shakespeare was writing characters like a Dogberry, like Dogberry was played by Will Kemp, characters like Dogberry from Much Ado About Nothing, he was writing that with Will Kemp in mind. So Will Kemp was not a good singer, but he was a great physical comedian. So it was written as a physical comedy. Whereas in 1599, a guy called Robert Armin joined them. Will Kemp dies, became the actor who plays the fools. When Will Robert Armin becomes the actor who plays the fools, then you have fools like Jacques. Then you have fools like Jacques from As You Like It. These are the fools who sing. These are the fools who think. The best fool to represent this is someone called Feste. Feste the clown from Twelfth Night. Right? The raineth every day is a sing that Feste the clown sings. Right? At the end of the play. Now the playwrights were paid per play, they collaborated, and that is why, because they had a company, they shared the profit. All the actors also had a copy of the play, and it is because the colleagues owned the play as well and not just Shakespeare, that the first folio in 1623 of Shakespeare's work could be assembled. Right? Now hostility towards theatre was constant. Right? As I said earlier, there was a guy called Master of Revels whose job was to censor plays. That's so, and theatre companies needed a nobleman's support to make sure their company is not under legal trouble. So a lot of issue was always there from the city corporation. Right? At the same time, there was plague, there was disorder, and there were Puritan moralists who believed that idolatry and cross-dressing are bad thing. Idolatry means that when you look at play, it was related to worshipping or attending to a representation. Idolatry means worshipping the murti or an idol of a god. Puritans believed any kind of idolatry is bad, and play is an idol of reality, so it is bad. They also said when an actor puts on a character, they are rejecting the self that God gave them to adopt a different self. That was also a problem for the Puritans. If you remember, I told you earlier, Puritans were direct descendants of John Calvin. And cross-dressing, of course, because you're rejecting your natural gender, so they had a problem with that. So in 1642, right, this was just when the Jacobean era was ending. Basically, parliament closed the playhouses. There were no plays until restoration of 1660. So about 16 years of no theater, which would be 20 days of no YouTube for you guys, because you have to study. And when it comes back in restoration, it changes. Right? Now let's look at Renaissance prose. Right? We looked at poetry, we looked at drama. Now it's time to look at Renaissance prose. Give me a thumbs up if you understood so far. Mimology, why are you crying? Okay, good. Now in prose, we need to look at a few things. We need to look at euphuism, we need to look at Thomas Nash, we need to look at Bacon, and we need to look at these minor writers. Let's start with John Lilly. John Lilly wrote a text called Euphues, or the Anatomy of the Wit, in 1578. Now this is another date. Again, tell me in the chat, how are you going to remember the dates? Tell me quickly in the chat, how are you going to remember the dates? Right, meanwhile, I go ahead. This was an enormous success, so he wrote a sequel called Euphues and His England in 1580. Now the word euphuism, which is not euphemism, it is euphuism. Yes, you're going to remember all the dates. For those who have just joined, you're going to remember all the dates by the help of flashcards. Flashcards are going to be given to you for absolutely free. Just go to the link in description. There is Ultimate Revision course. Click on enroll now. It shows 3,000 something rupees. Do not pay anything. The moment you click on it, there is the free material where there are flashcards. The live will go on until I reach the point where I can feel good about leaving the live. Right? Because I'm taking out time, so I need to do things. So euphuism is a style of writing. It's a style. I hope you appreciate, even though I want to talk to you guys, because a lot of you are new. I have not talked to you. A lot of you are not my students, but I can't waste your time. Maybe after the exam, I'll have a live and we'll have a conversation together. Right? In which there are balanced clauses, which means as is this, so is that. That would be a balanced clause, right? So both the parts of the clause, both the clause of the sentence have same weight. There's antithesis, which means they also are antithetical. There is alliteration, there is rhetorical question, and most importantly, endless supplies of natural similes. Endless supplies. In the In my lecture on Elizabethan literature, I have given you a lot of examples of euphuism and taught you how to identify euphuism. If you get an example, get it in question, a question on it. If you want to watch that lecture again, click on the course in description. This particular lecture will be paid, but all other revision material is free. Now it is easy to mock and impossible to overvalue, which means it is important, right? And it gave English prose its habit of shape. When you read English prose by anyone, you will see that prose is not just jagged lines. There are clauses which are balanced. There are arguments which are built. That is all because of a guy called John Lilly, right? John Lilly, I ruined his name. Now there is Nash. Thomas Nash wrote a text called The Unfortunate Traveler, right? This is a prose comedy. This is a prose satire. The Unfortunate Traveler follows Jack Wilton through European wars, execution, impostures, वगैरह वगैरह. And in this we get something less ornamental and more everyday. He also wrote Piers Perilous, his supplication to the devil, which is satire on London life. He also had a pamphlet war with Gabriel Harvey, not important, right? Gabriel Harvey is a staunch critic of a lot of our poets that we study, right? So here we have a prose which sounds like the quote, right? It is beautiful, it's ornamental, there's a lot of metaphors, similes. In Nash, we have prose which sounds like the tavern, like someone drunk and talking. Now, prose also includes novels, but novel will be later, right? Novel comes much later. So there were some fictional works which were written in prose, not in verse, before the proper novel in this age. First, we'll look at Thomas Delaunay, who was a silk weaver, not important, who wrote a book called Jack of Newbury, The Gentle Craft, Thomas of Reading. These are all stories. They are basically stories which are written in prose, not in verse. Right? Someone tell me in chat the difference between prose and verse. Then there's Robert Greene, I talked about this, who wrote a romance called Pandosto in 1588, which is the source for Winter's Tale, right? And he also wrote Coney Catching pamphlets, which talked about the London's confidence tricks. I'm not sure what this means, whatever. Coney Catching pamphlets, why are they important? Because pamphlets are central to development of prose. Then there is Thomas Lodge, who wrote Rosalind, which was the romance behind As You Like It. We have talked about it. And George Gascoigne, who wrote The Adventures of Master F.J., an early experiment in prose narrative told through letters and poems. Prose is without rhyme and meter. Exactly. It has rhyme, it has them. Whereas prose does not have these things. Now tell me this, guys in the chat, tell me how are you going to access these notes that I'm making? By the way, you will get it without all my markings. My markings will make it unreadable. How are you going to access it? Tell me quickly in the chat. Now, we looked at three types of prose. We looked at this beautifully ornate prose. We looked at this somewhat vulgar tavern prose. We looked at prose fiction. But there is also the prose of inquiry, which is the prose you will use to write something like philosophy, write something like an essay. That is Francis Bacon. How will you get this material? Yes, in the Telegram channel, the link is in description. You'll get this material for free. I'll send it right away. Not on the website, clap1296. He was the Lord Chancellor, again important person, very influential prose writer. His essays first came out in 1597 and were enlarged, so he kept adding more essays in 1612 and 1625. His essays are short. For example, Of Studies is just like this big. Dense, aphoristic. Aphoristic means they say a lot in very little. Let me give you an example of aphorism, which is also an example of epigram here. Some books are to be tasted, like there are some books that you read basically very superficially, others to be swallowed, some books you read with some time, some for you to be chewed and digested. To swallow means that you quickly consume it. Some books need to spend time, you need to assimilate into your being. But so much is said in this one thing. This compressed way of seeing is this compressed way of talking is called An aphorism. It's also an epigram. Epigram is a small witty saying which can stand on its own. Now, one of his important influences, people he was influenced by, is Michel de Montaigne. Montaigne wrote essays as well, but his essays are a lot less structured. My Little Lord Keeper. Yeah, that is what Queen Elizabeth called Francis Bacon. He also wrote The Advancement of Learning, very important for Renaissance. He wrote Novum Organum, where in both of these works he talks about knowledge must be built upwards from particulars. So this is called empiricism, right? Rather than deduced downwards from authority. So you observe the world and then you get a knowledge. You don't get a knowledge from an authority, right? Remember that. He wrote New Atlantis, which reimagines a society organized around a research institute, an academic institute, yes, specific to general, which is also called, if you know your paper one, this is called inductive reasoning. He fell from office in 20, not important. A lot of the people believe that he is the actual writer behind Shakespeare's plays. So there is something called bardolatry, which is the belief that Shakespeare is great, blah blah blah. So some people say that people who believe that Shakespeare wrote all of this are not doing nothing other than bardolatry. They're doing idolatry of Shakespeare. And I don't think Shakespeare actually wrote these things. People who believe that Shakespeare did not actually write his plays are called anti Stratfordians, because Stratford is where Shakespeare was from. Clap, learning from experience, that's what it is, right? Learning from observation, learning from experience are similar. The exact word will be observation, because experience is also mental, right? Observation is physical and recorded. Now let's look at some other prose writers. Richard Hooker wrote, very important writer, but you don't often study him, wrote of the laws of ecclesiastical polity. Ecclesiastical means church related. It's a defense of the Anglican way of doing church, right? Sir Walter Raleigh, we talked about this, History of the World, written in the Tower. The Tower of London is a prison. Richard Hakluyt wrote the Principal Navigation, Voyages and Discoveries of the English Nation. Robert Burton, as famously wrote, Anatomy of Melancholy. Sir Thomas Browne, who was a doctor, wrote Religio Medici and Urn Burial. Isaac Walton wrote The Complete Angler, which is a fisher manual. John Foxe wrote Acts and Monument, which is a book of martyrs. This is central to Reformation. Thomas Hobbes, of course, you know this, wrote Leviathan, which is referred to in Paradise Lost. The creature Leviathan from the Bible. In Leviathan, there is something called the social contract. This is important, the social contract theory, in which he says that humans by nature are cruel and dangerous and evil. Hi, some happy. So humans are bad. If a person is allowed to do whatever they want without freedom, they are going to create chaos. So therefore, the solution to this is that people give up their freedom in exchange of protection. So why do societies form? Because freedom will make people barbaric. So that is the social contract. The contract is, I will give my freedom up for society. That is the social contract. Because life outside the state, which is outside civilization, is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish and short. So this is a very negative, pessimistic view of human nature. Now let's talk about the most important work of prose and poetry, because Bible has both, the English Bible. Right? There are 6 translations that we'll look at. 1380s is the Wycliffe Bible, which is the pioneering manuscript translation. This is one of the first, which is associated with John Wycliffe and Lollards. Lollards are the followers of Wycliffe. This was an illegal Bible, right? It was heretical. Translating the Bible to vernacular language at the point was considered heretical, right? It's religious crime. Tyndale's New Testament is the Bible of the Christians, right? Let me Bible of the Christians. He translated from Greek and printed it abroad. Why? Because it was illegal to print a vernacular Bible and smuggled it in. He was strangled and burned in 1536. Right? But the Tyndale's New Testament was something that influenced the authorized version, though this person was killed. Then there's the Coverdale Bible in 1535 by Miles Coverdale. It was a first complete English Bible. So neither of these were complete, right? This is a New Testament. Complete Bible also has the Old Testament. And his Psalms, his translation of the Psalms, which is a poetic part of the Bible, is still in Book of Common Prayer, which is a book which is sung in churches of England. This is the Coverdale Bible, very important. The Great Bible is the first officially authorized version which was placed in churches. The first official English Bible is the Great Bible. Coverdale's revision of Tyndale, right? This is basically a love child of these two Bibles. Then there is very important, the Geneva Bible made by Marians. Marians are the worshippers of Virgin Mary, right? In Calvin's Geneva. So it's a Calvinistic Bible. Give me a thumbs up if that makes sense. It's a small, cheap, verse numbered, heavily annotated Bible, right? This is the Bible which was also approved by the Puritans and also Bible publicly sold. This is the Bible of Shakespeare. This is the Bible that Shakespeare refers to. Then there's the Bishop's Bible, which is also Anglican response to the Geneva Bible. And finally, there is the Authorized Bible or the King James Bible. It was commissioned by James I in 1604, 1 year after he ascended in 1603. And 50 scholars worked on this book. And they read all of this to give this Bible. This is the best, not because these people are the most important. This is the best because they learn from all of them. Gutenberg Bible is not an English Bible memology. Gutenberg is in Germany. Gutenberg is a German press. Now translations, I will not talk about this, but please read this, take a screenshot. This is very interesting. We have to keep moving. Now, what is the literary legacy? What is the King James Bible's contribution to literature? First is the rhythm. Now, authorized version was made to read out loud in the church, right? The priest will read them. So it is built for the ear. It is very musical. To plainness with grandeur, right? Its vocabulary is very short and native, right? It doesn't use too many words from the foreign times. But it has a great rhythm and repetition rather than long Latin words. There are two types of words in English, Germanic words and Latin words. It does not have long Latin words. It has repetition instead, which is a stylistic decision that people like people like Bunyan, Defoe, very importantly, Blake and Hemingway will learn. Defoe important because that will become the language of the novel. Latinate words will become the language of philosophy. Okay, so when you read philosophy and the novel, they sound different, right? This is why they sound different. Idioms, they had some sentences which became idiomatic, which means everybody was repeating them. For example, a thorn in flesh, powers that be, eat, drink, and be merry, a law unto themselves, etc. And very importantly, parallelism. So Bible is originally in Hebrew. Now Hebrew works by balancing clause in a poem. So if you want to write a poem in if you are writing a poem in ancient Hebrew, you will balance the clause instead of having rhymes. Therefore, these parallelisms that are in the Bible, right? Let me think of a biblical parallelism. Let me go. You know what? Let's move on. Let's not waste time. Parallelisms are parallel structures that was carried into English, and again, Blake, Whitman, all of these use that parallelism. In fact, Blake's greatest work, Songs of Innocence and Song of Experience, is nothing but an extended parallelism. Now, Geneva Bible is a Calvinist Bible that Shakespeare quotes. KJV is in 1604, so a lot of Shakespeare plays are already written by this time. Excuse me. Tyndale is the source of much of AV's paraphrasing. Now let's talk about Shakespeare. King James is considered the most accurate translation of the Bible. Possibly, right? Again, translations can never be very accurate. Now, Shakespeare was born in Stratford. Let's just start with this. He was born in Stratford upon Avon. Avon is a river. Stratford is a village. It's a town. In 1564, he was married to Anne Hathaway, who plays Penelope in the Odyssey movie. Actually, not. That's a different Anne Hathaway. And he appeared in London, and briefly he disappeared. Right? We don't know what happened to him, but he then came back and became a writer. He was a shareholder of the Lord Chamberlain's men and later of the Kinsmen. He became very rich. And by the way, we don't know much about Shakespeare, but we have his will testament, right? That who gets what property. And he did not leave much to one of his son-in-laws. So we believe he did not like him, or maybe he did not like his daughter. And he died in 1616. 1564 to 1616. Quickly tell me, how are you going to remember all of these dates? Now he has 4 phases. First is the apprenticeship, where he wrote the 3 Henry VI plays. So Henry VI part 1, part 2, part 3. This is where he wrote Richard III. Thomas More wrote the history of Richard III. Yes, you will remember all the dates through flashcard, which are available for free. Link in description, called Ultimate Revision Course. Of his apprentice phase, we have Comedy of Errors, The Taming of the Shrews, Titus Andronicus, and Two Gentlemen of Verona. Here he is deeply influenced by Christopher Marlowe. In 1595 to 1600, he masters comedy and history. Romeo and Juliet is a comedy, it's a tragedy. I don't know why this is here. Richard II is one of his best histories. Midsummer Night's Dream, Merchant of Venice. These are 2 of his best comedies. Henry IV part 1 and 2 are the best histories. I love these plays. You must read them or watch them. Much Ado About Nothing, Henry V, Julius Caesar, As You Like It, Twelfth Night. All of these are 1560 to 1600, 1595. Now, can you tell me how are you going to cover the summaries of these works? Because you must cover the summaries of the works which are new. How are you going to cover them quickly? Quickly tell me in the chat. 1601 to 1608 are when the tragedies and the problem plays abound. Tragedies like Hamlet, Troilus and Cressida, Measure for Measure is a problem play. Troilus and Cressida is also considered a problem play sometimes. Othello, King Lear, Macbeth, Antony and Cleopatra, Coriolanus, Timon of Athens. All's well that ends well. Yes, you will cover summary from the summary sheet which is available in our Telegram. Do not go looking for summaries. All of those summaries are in English. So summary sheet available in Telegram is in English. If you want Hindi summaries, you'll have to search for them yourself. Then final phase, 1608 to 813, is when we have late romances. Pericles, Cymbeline, The Winter's Tale, Tempest, Henry VIII, and Two Noble Kinsmen. Now these Winter's Tale, Tempest, these romances are unrealistic, which means they do not have realism. CUVT PG will make a video. I don't have, we'll have to go through this. Now the source of his history are Raphael Holinshed's Chronicles. Right, Holinshed's Chronicles are the source of history of Scotland and England. Plutarch's Life are the sources of Roman plays. Right, the subject of these plays is legitimacy. Now, I told you Queen Elizabeth did not have a child. So at that point, a big question in everybody's mind was who's going to be the next king and what is the right way of becoming a king, what a right king is. That is why in all the major plays of Shakespeare around that time, around Queen Elizabeth's later phase, we see obsession with the legitimacy of rule. What makes a ruler rightful? Happens a lot in Henry IV, happens in Macbeth, right? Moving on, comedies, the wood outside the city is very important. The general structure of a Shakespearean comedy is that there is a city and there is the woods. In city, love is not possible, so the lovers, what happened? So lovers go to the woods. Now in the woods, something happens which allows the marriage to happen in the city. This is the structure of As You Like It. This is the structure of Midsummer Night's Dream. This is also, if you bend it a little bit, the structure of Twelfth Night, right? There the woods is the changing of genders. Now, in almost all of Shakespeare comedies, the resolution is never complete. Remember, the word comedy doesn't mean funny. Word comedy means that there's a resolution which is happy. That's what a comedy means. That's why the immensely serious poem called the Divine Comedy has the word comedy in it, because it's a serious, it has a good conclusion. Now, Malvolio in Twelfth Night says, I'll be revenged on the lot of you, which means he's not happy. So how is this a happy ending? How is this a resolution? And the answer is, there is never a resolution. In Shakespearean comedies, there is always something which leaves you a little bitter taste in your mouth. Like the torture that Malvolio goes through in Twelfth Night, like the injustice that Shylock goes through in Merchant of Venice, like Jack not singing in As You Like It, right? These are some of the examples. Now let's look at the structure of tragedies. The way tragedies are seen, although it is incredibly simplistic, Shakespeare's tragedies are more complicated. I've talked about Shakespeare's tragedies in my lectures. You can find them in the link below, where you have free material as well. These are the major tragedies: Hamlet, Othello, King Lear, Macbeth, Antony and Cleopatra, and two Roman plays, Ulysses and Coriolanus. Hamlet is struggling with his own conscience, right? His own mind. He's a man who cannot stop thinking. Now, one thing I've said before and I want you guys to note is that Hamlet is not an overthinker. Hamlet doesn't think too much, he thinks too deeply. Right? Then there is Othello, who's the jealousy poisoned by, and there is Iago, who is one of the most villainous villains of Shakespearean drama. There is King Lear, which is about an old king who gives things away. There's a fool who tells the truth. I'm not going to share the summaries with you because summaries are in the summary sheet. All the summaries line by line, you can quickly cover them. Macbeth is about usurpation. Hamlet is the longest play. Macbeth is the longest tragedy. Macbeth is the shortest tragedy. Hamlet is also the longer play in general. Antony and Cleopatra is about public duty and private passion. Right? Julius Caesar and Coriolanus are about Roman politics. He learned it from Plutarch's Lives of Romans and Greeks. So basically, in Plutarch's lives, one Greek and one Roman life are parallelly considered. Romances I talked about, they are improbable stories, right? About shipwrecks, about magic, about oracles, those kind of things. Yeah, Iago is a Machiavellian villain. He's called, there's a word that Johnson used for him, motiveless malignity. So he has no reason to be evil. He's evil for the sake of being evil, and that is what makes him so interesting. Now, First Folio 1623 is the only reason why we have Shakespeare's work. Otherwise, we only would have references to Shakespeare's work. Now, there are two actors, John Heminges and Henry Condell, who collected 36 plays in a single volume, and they are the ones who divided them into comedies, histories, and tragedies. At that times, history did not mean past. Histories mean stories. But now it means past. Right? 18 of them, including Macbeth, Tempest, Twelfth Night, Julius Caesar, were never printed before. So there were earlier quarto versions. This is a folio, which means this is a bigger book. I don't have a page, I'll show you. If this is a page, you fold it like this. This is a big book, that is a quarto. If you fold it again, that is a folio. If you fold it again, that is a quarto. So quarto editions were smaller books. So a lot of the plays were existent in quartos, right? One first quarto, second quarto. For example, Hamlet. The quarto edition of Hamlet has very different things compared to the folio edition. So whenever you study Hamlet, you study both quarto and folio editions. Quarto is the smallest. A bad quarto is a corrupt text constructed from memory. Folio is larger, which is what the 1623 collection is. Problem plays do not sit in any one genre, like Measure for Measure, Troilus and Cressida, also that ends well. Sometimes Merchant of Venice is also considered a problem play. Is basically a problem to be solved in Measure for Measure. There's a character called Isabel. She's the nun. Her brother is being punished to death. She wants to save him, and she goes to Angelo, a judge, and he says, if you have sex with me, I will let him go. And she says, I won't. And she goes to her brother, and this is one of my favorite scenes. Her brother says, no, never do that. You can't lose your honor because she's a nun. You can't lose your religious purity because of me. And she says, okay. And he says, oh, hold on. You know what? Go sleep with him. I will die, sister. Come on, go sleep with him. And she says, a little bitch like you cannot be my brother. All a beautiful, beautiful exchange. Of course, ridiculous too. Late plays are particularly symbol in Winter's Tale and Tempest. Now let's talk about poetry of Shakespeare, sonnets, and the language. I don't know. Now the shape of the sonnet. The sonnets were printed in 1609, but they were circulating earlier. Right? They are printed without Shakespeare's involvement, and they're dedicated to someone called W.H., who we believe was his patron, and has never been identified. What makes this one interesting is yes, crap, men. What makes this one interesting is that this is the first sonnet sequence, at least the first major one, in which the beloved is a dude instead of a dudette. First 17 sonnets are the procreation sonnets, which are asking a beautiful young man to marry and have a child. That which some people say to Salman Khan. Sorry, I'm joking around. It is first fun to joke around, but it kills the efficiency. 18 to 126 are to the young man. They are about love, absence, jealousy, social difference, right? When in fortune and men's eyes, something, something. The ravages of time and increasingly calm claim that the poem will be the only form of survival for that person's beauty. These are the, 78 to 86 are the rival poet group where another writer is fighting for the beloved's attention. All of these sonnets are about the young man. 127 to 152 are about a dark lady who we believe was actually a black woman, which makes Shakespeare quite interesting. Uh, Apparently he, you know, was progressive in that way, because again, women who were enslaved, the slaves existed in England, right? They were abolished in Victorian era. If they had a sexual relationship uh, with a white man, it would have been that of it would have been a forced one, right? But that's not what we see here. Although it's clearly not uh, progressive in our way, right? There's a describe with disgust, self-content, and lack of clear-sightedness. Sonnet 129 is on lust. 130, my mistress eyes are nothing like the sun, is an anti-patriarchal high point. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Right, shall I compare thee to a summer's day is anti-patriarchal, because patriarch was someone who compared his beloved to summer's day. The whole series is anti-patriarchal. 1553 to 1554 are two Anacreontic poems. These are based on Anacreon, which is a Greek poem, which are poems on Cupid. Now, what is the form of the Shakespearean stanza sonnet? I've already talked about it. A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, G, G. Three quatrains allow three moves in an argument, right? Three moves. I have taught Shakespeare's sonnets line by line in my lectures. You can find them in the Ultimate Revision course. Again, link in description. My 10 hours on Shakespeare are enough to cover all of Shakespeare. I'm going to go far enough to say in the UGC net sphere there are no better lectures on Shakespeare. I'm saying far enough because I was watching a guy's UGC net lecture on Shakespeare, and I don't know what that person taught because I wanted to. Some jokes help us refill a lost interest. Yeah, it's no thing is, I have a relationship with joke where I start making jokes throughout. If there is anyone here from our literary odyssey batch, please confirm if I digress because of jokes a lot or not. So a Petrarchan sonnet is an 8 line of one thing, 6 line of other things. That's how you get 8 plus 6, an octave and a sestet. Sestet also has a volta, right, at line number 9. Whereas in Shakespeare, volta happens at the very end in the 2 lines. Now, some recurring subjects in Shakespearean sonnets is time as an enemy, verse as defense, right? So long lives this is poem, and this gives life to thee, from sonnet number 18. Doubleness, which means he never simplifies. For example, he never simplifies even in his plays, so he never simplifies, right? And a self-accusation, which happens mostly in this set. He has also written 4 major narrative poems. Of course, these are not poems we study in much detail. Venus and Adonis, The Rape of Lucrece, Lover's Complaint, and Phoenix and the Turtle. These 2 are of lower quality. Venus and Adonis is a wonderful poem dedicated to Earl of Southampton, where goddess of love Venus, which is the Roman name of Aphrodite. Thank you, Forest of Fireflies. Boy who would rather go hunting. So there is a guy called Adonis, too young. Venus, goddess of beauty herself, wants to make love to him, and he says, "Hell no, I need to kill a pig," and then the pig kills him. Rape of Lucrece, also dedicated to Southampton, is a grave rhetorical work. We have talked about all of these poems in detail in my Shakespeare poetry lectures. Again, in Ultimate Revision course below. A Lover's Complaint, which was printed in 1609. A woman's account of seduction and betrayal. The Phoenix and the Turtle, which is Pound's short, dense, riddle-like poem. Now, metaphysical poets. Now, quickly tell me, should I continue or not? Doubleness is not negative capability as such, but essentially, the thing is, Keats said that Shakespeare has negative capability, right? That's a term that predominantly applies to a Keatsian kind of relationship to uncertainty. Shakespeare is not, it seems to me at least, that Shakespeare's uncertainty that he delves in is not, for Keats, it's an exploratory thing. For Shakespeare, it seems descriptive, if that makes sense. Give me a thumbs up if you want me to continue, Abhi. If you want me to continue this lecture right now, give me a thumbs up. If that 10 thumbs up or 15, if that 10 thumbs up, I'll continue right now. Please, quick. We have finished 10 chapters today, which is good. Harman, that is 1 thumbs up. Quickly. Two thumbs up only. 3, 4, 5. Good. Crap, is that a thumbs up? If I get 10, I'll continue. 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. I'm sorry, guys, we'll have to continue. So metaphysical poets are also important in the English Renaissance. Right, let's quickly talk about what a metaphysical poet is. Now, this is not a word that they themselves used. In fact, it was John Dryden who complained that John Donne affects the metaphysics. Metaphysics is philosophy of being. We'll talk about it later. And perplexes the minds of women with nice speculation of philosophy. So he basically said, Donne says complicated things to win women over, to win favors from women. And he said he should instead be engaging their hearts. So Dryden is what? Dryden is the earliest offshoot of English literature which goes towards neoclassicism, right? He is himself a restoration writer. Dryden's issue with Donne was that Dryden's issue with Donne was that Donne does not talk about emotions to win women's hearts. He talks about intellectual things. He's too intellectual. So Dryden made a difference between two things, about the mind and the heart. Excuse me. He said that mind should not be used in love poetry, heart should be used. That is called dissociation of sensibility. That is why in the neoclassical era onwards, dissociation of sensibility is something that T.S. Eliot diagnoses as a problem with post-Donne writers. Right? Donne had a unified sensibility. Now, Samuel Johnson, writing in Life of Cowley in his Lives of Poets, turned this complaint of Dryden into the definition. He said metaphysical poets were these poets who, in whose works most heterogeneous ideas are yoked together by violence. Right? Now, these are both attacks, but it became the definition. But what actually makes a metaphysical poem is a conceit. A conceit is an extended metaphor, which is ingenious, which is an ingenious comparison, which means you are comparing some random things. For example, I am comparing this water bottle to the meaning of life. Right? That's a two disparate things. I am comparing a mathematical equation to love. Right? These are metaphysical conceit. It has to be long and has to be logical to the point where ordinary metaphor would not go. Ordinary metaphor works with perceived similarity, right? whereas a metaphysical conceit works with a logical argument. The compass from valediction, yeah. I've talked about all of these poems in my lectures. Argument as structure, the poem does not follow the sonnet structure, does not follow the ode structure, the follows an argumentative structure. Argument A, argument B, argument C, therefore. Right? For God's sake, hold your tongue and let me love. And then he describes why he should let him love. Mark this flea and mark in this. How little of what you denized me is. Right? Look at this flea and think about this. So he makes flea a metaphor for yielding love, yielding herself for the beloved. Dramatic speaking voice, there's always a speaker. In his metaphysical poem, there's always a speaker, right? For example, there's the there's the convincer, in the persuader, in the flea. Right? There's a friend who's fighting against other friends. Ki, why are you attacking my love? In canonization, from where this line is, for God's sake, hold your tongue and let me love. Learned material used physically. Learned material are things that you learn, like literary theory, like alchemy, cartography, astronomy, scholastic theology. Scholastic means medieval. And new science, they give the images for feeling. Right? They're not used for display. Wit and passion are used together. Right? Wit is mind, passion is heart. It is a unified sensibility. Now let's look at the primary metaphysical poet, who is John Donne, who is a Catholic. A Catholic right now can be here. Why? Because Queen Elizabeth was tolerant toward Catholics, unlike the other monarchs. So his work has two divisions. First is the young, that sexually charged work of wicked young Jack Donne, and other is his religious work of Dr. Donne, which is the Holy Sonnets. The Songs and Sonnets is a collection in which you find the flea, the sun rising, the canonization, valediction, forbidden morning, the good morrow, and the ecstasy. They treat erotic love with complete serious philosophy. Right? You have seen this poem. Diksha, I want to cover more, but I will again, after a while, I'll ask the students again. If they don't want to continue, I won't continue. Then there are the Holy Sonnets, which are of the Dr. Donne, right? This is Jack Donne, the vulgar guy, and this is Dr. Donne, who writes Holy Sonnets, who use the same philosophical rigor to talk about God. Batter my heart, three-person God for you, something, something, something. This was in DU when I was in undergrad. Death be not proud, the anatomy of the world. These are the works which are an example. Anatomy of the world mourns a dead God and the collapse of the cosmic order. By the way, in Anatomy of the World, give me a thumbs up if this is the most beautiful handwriting you have ever seen in your whole life. In Anatomy of the World, he refers to Copernicus Nicholas's arguments that Earth is not at the center of the universe. And in his prose is very important, by the way. He is a great prose writer. He wrote devotions on emergent occasions, which was something he wrote when he was seriously sick, which has a very famous line, no man is an island. Right? Very, very famous line, which is something which means no person is isolated. And never sent to know for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. This is where Hemingway got his name for whom the bell tolls. He was also a preacher, then his sermons are first class. His works again are songs and sonnets, where you have all the metaphysical poems, holy sonnets, satires, the anniversaries, devotions upon emergent occasions, and sermons. Now then there is George Herbert, is a more religious of the group. He is an orator at Cambridge University. He speaks, and he was also briefly a member of the parliament. Herbert has done ingenuity, means he is also genius, but does not have his directness, his aggression. I've talked about this in a recent video on how to do poetry questions. Absolutely was that has some great advice. Now George Herbert does something called pattern poems. also called concrete poetry. Again, thumbs up, is the most beautiful line comparable to, I don't know, Van Gogh's painting. Hi Anshura. So pattern poems or concrete poems are poems which are arranged on the page in such a way that they make an image. For example, Easter Wings looks like this. His poem Easter Wings looks like this, right? Looks like wings, right? Looks like wings. Similarly, his poem Altar looks like this. Looks like an altar. For example, his poem about a crown would look like this, right? Looks like a crown, doesn't it? Right? These are concrete poems, pattern poems, but pattern poems we say, but the actual word is concrete poems. The Pulley is a poem in which he talks about why God withheld the gift of rest, why people have to toil throughout their life. Easter Wings and Altar are the typical pattern poems. Other important ones are the Temple, the Caller, very important, the Pulley, Virtue, Love, Three, Easter Wings, the Altar, Redemption, and his prose work, A Priest to the Temple. Now then there is Andrew Marvell. I call him a freak. He was a proper freak. Right in the chat, Andrew Marvell was a proper freak. So he has written very pedophilic poems too. He wrote about a woman who's he couldn't wait for her to grow old because she's so beautiful. So he's a proper weirdo. He probably would go to the island. He was Milton's colleague under Commonwealth, which means he was working with him. He was also an MP. He has written the greatest poem. Yes, he's a proper freak. Let's say called Marvel is a proper freak, though writes gracefully, but he's a proper freak. He wrote to his coy mistress, which is a Carpe Diem poem. Carpe Diem means seize the day. Seize the day basically means, you know what, don't worry, you're going to die, have sex with me. That's what seize the day poems are. And that's what to his coy mistresses. It has one of my, after saying that he's a proper freak, it seems weird to say one of my very favorite lines. At my back I always hear time's winged chariot drawing near, and yonder all before us lie deserts of vast eternity. So he hears time approaching, and in front of us after that there are deserts of vast eternity. What a beautiful line. But a proper freak. Right, to his coy mistress, he says, you are being very shy, but it would make sense to be shy if we had world enough and time, but we don't have world enough and time. We gotta get to it as soon as possible. I guess that's his logic. Then there is the garden, which prefers green solitude to human love. For sure, brother, based on your poems, doesn't look like it. The definition of love, which builds a whole case out of geometry. This, I think, is a poem we have talked about in our lectures. And Horatian Ode upon Cromwell's return from Ireland is a very interesting poem. What makes this poem interesting is that it's a balanced political poem, which is both in support of Cromwell and grants dignity to Charles I. His works to his coy mistress, The Garden, Definition of Love, Bermudas, Upon Appleton House, and Horatian Ode, and the Mauer poems. Let's look at the rest of the metaphysical school. There is Henry Vaughan, who is a Welsh doctor, who wrote Silex Scintillanus, right, in which he wrote, I saw eternity the other night. Right, they are all, he writes about that childhood and nature are a way to go to God. They are all gone into the world of light. I saw eternity the other night. Very graceful, pretty poems. Wordsworth Immortality Ode is an is inspired by Henry Vaughan's poem The Retreat. Richard Crashaw, converted to Catholicism, died at Loreto. Not important. His poems are Flaming Heart, Hymn to Saint Teresa. Thomas Traherne was lost and rediscovered around 1900, so about 350 years after him. He was rediscovered, and he wrote Centuries of Meditation. Right, Abraham Cowley, you already know. Right, Cowley's life is where we get that Johnsonian definition. He wrote The Mistress. Excuse me. He wrote The Mistress and an unfinished biblical epic, Davides. Right? This is supposed to be about David, of course. Right? Like the Odyssey is about Odysseus. And he wrote Pindaric Odes. Now, I want you to know one thing about one interesting thing. Let's take a small detour. Is that epic is the culmination of a poet's whole life. Yes, Shatabdi, Mistress will be like, what a freak. An epic is the greatest thing a poet could do. And there are so many attempted epics and so many epics which were not good enough. That epic is truly the marker of an absurdly, unfairly gigantic task for posterity. Think of all the epic writers you study with this. Epics are also of two types. First, primary epic and secondary epic. Primary are the ones which are oral, the Homer, Ramayana, Mahabharata, Epic of Gilgamesh. Secondary is the ones which a writer has written, right? Fairy Queen, Paradise Lost, Tasso's epic, Jerusalem, something, remind me. Catherine Phillips, again known as Mathless Orinda, wrote metaphysically argued poems about friendship between women. Edward Herbert, Lord Herbert of Shrewsbury, was Herbert's elder brother, right? Where is Herbert? Oh, was Herbert's elder brother. Not important. John Cleveland was a royalist, which means he supported King Charles in the Civil War, right? Now, the neoclassical writers found these poets barbarous, irregular, hard, and over ingenious. This is all about the wit. They had an issue with their wit mixing with passion. They believe they need more of this for the kind of thing that they're writing. And in 1921, T.S. Eliot wrote an essay called Metaphysical Poets, and he wrote multiple essays actually on Andrew Marvell, on Colley, and he said that they possessed a unified sensibility where brain and heart work together, and they were not yet separate, which has been lost, which is called dissociation of sensibility. Now, 1921 में T.S. Eliot did this. How will you remember this? For those who have joined us recently, how are you going to remember this? Through flashcards, which are available for free. Link in description. Our ultimate revision course has free flashcards. Open and you will see them. Now, moving on to the Cavalier poets. Cavalier poets were the poets who supported King Charles I. And after the Civil War, they lost, right? So, the difference between metaphysical poets and Cavalier poets. Okay. Voting again. Guys, if you want me to continue to, you know what, actually 2 hours and 12 minutes is enough. So let me teach you how to revise. Give me 1 second to teach you how to revise. I've done this already, but let me show you guys once more. You go to theliteraryodyssey.com, click on prices. I can't show you, the account is logged out because my tech guy is doing something. You go to theliteraryodyssey.com, click on prices, pricing at the top. There's a course called Ultimate Revision Course, which has free material. When you go to that course, it will say enroll now for 3,000 rupees. No need to do that. Just click on enroll now and use the free material. There's a module called December 9 Special Revision. You'll find everything there. You have MCQs. All of your homework today is to, after this lecture is over, you will open that MCQ and there is Renaissance to Restoration part 1 of 1. You will do the part 1 of 1 today. Diksha, if you want all the MCQs at once from all the books that you have made, then you'll have to buy the Ultimate Revision course. But it is expensive right now. So we are planning to give a much cheaper 1 week long access and 2 week long access, so you can get it easily. Anything else? Diksha, if you have bought it, then please focus on live sessions, MCQs and flashcards. Lectures, only watch the things that you don't know at all, and don't watch every lecture. Okay, lectures are going to help you a lot, but our quizzes are absolute game changers, and our flashcards are absolute game changers. We have flashcards on every important line, every critical quote, every major work, every major author. You can just do flashcards for 20 days and do well. Your week in literary theory. I will teach literary theory live. Today I got a great response from you guys. If I keep getting response like this, I'll keep coming live, keep teaching you guys. If you learned something today, if you thought we very quickly were able to cover a lot of things, please give me a thumbs up. Please like this stream, and please, subscribe to the channel so you know when the streams are happening. We'll have a stream tomorrow, same time. We'll start with the Cavaliers. And once we are done with this, I'll share this PDF. Right? I can also share up to metaphysicals right now in the Telegram. So do join our Telegram channel. Thank you so much for joining, guys. Manas has said flashcards are really helpful. I purchased yesterday revision 1, I guess. Yes, flashcards are incredibly helpful. They are a hack. I don't know why people don't use it. I keep saying it in our videos, in my reels, everywhere. People use flashcards if you want to retain information quickly. Use MCQs to revise. You don't have to use ours. You can generate everything. If you need to use an AI, we have significantly better quality because of all the effort we have put and manpower we have put into it. But it is not that you can't make something yourself. Again, right now there is no time. Hello Diksha, I'm glad you are using flashcards. If you don't know how to use the flashcard, you can go to Dhananjay's video. Just search flashcard, the literary odyssey on YouTube. You'll find Dhananjay's video. He teaches you how to use flashcards. Oh, great, Diksha. If you make them yourself, that's excellent, right? That's what a lot of the students have not done. Like, they have not bought our course, neither have they made the flashcards themselves. It is a hack. I don't know why somebody would not do it. Swati, if you think this was a wonderful lecture, please watch the other lectures I've posted. I personally am not a fan of lectures like this. I prefer in-depth lectures. You use Quizlet, use Anki, ANKI. It's free, it's better, it's not as pretty, but Anki is the architecture that we make. Oh, Ajay is right. No jokes on Dhananjay today. Dhananjay has such a serious dissociation of sensibility that he is dissociated not only from wit but also from passion. He has neither wit nor passion, nor does he get views. I don't know what else to say. This is YouTube, there is only so much I can say, right? In group chat we say worse things sometimes. Anki does need a lot of effort, but exporting flashcards into Anki, if you have generated them, if you have made them on Excel sheet, is easier. Thank you, Jay. Anything else you guys would like to talk about? Don't be Samuel Johnson. What does that mean? I don't know why I'm lagging in UGC net. I haven't completed the syllabus in theory, Indian literature. Is it the reason? Diksha, text me if you have texted me already. I think there is a Diksha that I've spoken to. I don't know if that is you. Text me. I will send you our crash course list of videos, cover some stuff from there. In tomorrow's live, I'll share it with the rest as well. If you have bought our course, feel free to text the WhatsApp number that you see here. Right? You see a WhatsApp number here, right? Look at this WhatsApp logo. You can text on the number here and I will try to talk to you. If you're a part of the JRF Scholar course, then you have my personal number. You can always text me that, so you already know if you're a part of that. Yes, this live will stay on YouTube. Of course, this live will stay on YouTube. I'm not taking it down. I'm going to take as long as you. Oh, right. Read with me. Oh, Neha Char. Hello, Neha. That's one of our older students. She joined us in the first batch. So nice to see you. I was saying something which I completely forgot. Yeah, I'm planning to cover the entire syllabus, to make a free crash course with accompanying revision material with the summary sheet available forever. So if someone cannot buy the course, they can at the very least have a good starting point. because I trust only myself to teach people and not any other teacher. I've been very disappointed by the teachers. Again, I urge you to watch my lectures, my lecture video, YouTube video on Old English literature, and my YouTube video on Chaucer. My Chaucer video is the best video. How many times do I say this? And my Old English video looks very right. So if that is something that interests you, do watch them. Anything else, or should we end the day? That's it then. Thank you so much. Those who are a part of our JRF Scholar course, please let me know on WhatsApp how the lecture was. I know this is not how my lectures usually are. This was too quick, which is the antithesis of studying in depth, but this is what we must do. And those of you who are stressed, don't be stressed. Make sure you don't spend any time not doing anything. Watch summaries, right? Summary sheet freely available in Telegram. Do MCQs, do PYQs, do something, and just work one day, study one day. Imagine that you have to study just today. On 18th of August, I'm supposed to study. Okay, ठीक है. 18th of August को पढ़ना कोई बड़ी बात नहीं है. And do the same on 19th of August. Step by step, you can do so much. So this is the cream that I bought like some days ago. It's still a packet, but it's so light because my hands get very dry. You know why? Because even though I only get this much at a time, it's a weird video today, this much at a time, because I moisturize my hands so many times, the cream ends. The same is with your syllabus. Different ideas you together with violence. If you chip away at the syllabus every day, however slow, but right now you should do it fast, you are going to finish up things. UGC net is not a very tough exam. Do not skip on paper 1. I've made a video. I talked about you must give paper 1 as much importance. You must do a DI question every day. If you are bad at DI, you must do DI questions. Right? I cannot emphasize this enough. If you are bad at DI, you must do DI question every day. Use AI or a math tutor or YouTube video. Kumar Bharat sir, Dhananjay Pathak karke bhi koi hai. Just somehow do MDI questions, see how the question was done, and I assure, my throat is dead, and I assure you, you are going to do better than ever. Diaspora literature is a very small part. If I have time, I will make a video on it. I'll share it. If the live streams do well in future, Fabia, I will make Indian literature as well. Literary theory, my advice, see, you may not trust me, but my advice will be to, if you have studied theory before, just do my MCQs on literary theory. No better way to revise. We have 2 sets of MCQs on literary theory, all very comprehensive. Other advice would be to read a book called Literary Theory by David Carter. You can read the book in 5-6 hours, covers every major concept. Literary Theory by David Carter, 90 pages, 30 pages a day, 3-day literary theory cover, but very short pages. I read it for the first time in 3 hours. It's a very, very short book. Kumar Bhatt sir is amazing, I know. How many PYQs should I cover for paper 1? Mnemology 1 every day, ideally, if you don't have a lot of paper 2 to cover. But 3 to figure out what you need to work on, and then you can use KVS Madan to revise those topics. Anything else, guys, before I leave? Hopefully by the next year we can have a whiteboard so I can draw properly and you can see my wonderfully beautiful Shakespeare level, Van Gogh level, who else is Raja Ravi Verma level doodles. Is that all? PYQs, by the way, are freely available on our site in CBT format. Some are. I can make all of them available. Let me talk to the team. PDF of David Carter. See, I can't tell you because it's against copyright. But A library, B library, C library, D library, E library, F library. If you keep going, at the end, you'll find your answer. Right? And you can also download PDFs from the internet quite easily. I guess that's all then, guys. A to Z, yeah. Sanjay is here. Oh my god, the collective IQ of the stream has declined severely. The If you add all the IQ since Dhananjay has joined and divide them with the number, the average will be dangerously close to zero. That is probably not possible mathematically. Dhananjay, he who must not be named. Anything else, guys? Dhananjay, one of the students said that you are so dissociated. Your dissociation of sensibility is so severe that you neither have mind nor emotion. That was one of our students. That was Urmila. Urmila said that, Dhananjay, about you in chats. And I said, ki, please respect my subordinate, my intern. Anything else, guys? By the way, credit where credit is due. Dhananjay taught me how to use my iPad to write while recording. Maybe on a weekend, Dhananjay can take a maths session, but I don't think maths works like this. And paper one, I don't think can be done in a session. Paper two requires more attention. Thank you guys for joining. Thank you, Afzal. Thank you. I saw another thank you, I guess. Thank you, Afzal. That's Dhananjay might take some sessions. I'll discuss with him. Okay, guys, so do revise. Your homework is to go to the Ultimate Division course, solve the quiz, which is available for free. If you don't score at least 60%, then redo it again tomorrow and you will see how much you remember. It's quite easy. I will add flashcards either tonight or tomorrow morning, and you will use those flashcards to remember all the important dates that you need to remember. All right, that's all for today. All the very best. Take it slowly, and it's nothing you can't do, nothing you can't overcome. Goodbye, and all the best.